On June 6, 1944, the largest seaborne invasion in all of human history was launched. It was codenamed Operation Neptune, but we all know it as D-Day. This was it, the pivotal moment of World War II in Western Europe, the beginning of the end for Hitler's Fortress Europe. So, how did this monumental, incredibly risky operation even come together? And how did it unfold? Let's dive in.
Okay, let's put ourselves there. It's just after dawn on the coast of France. The air is just thick with the smell of salt and diesel fuel. After months and months of planning and a super tense 24-hour delay because of bad weather, the first waves of Allied troops are finally hitting the beaches.
You know, for the soldiers in those landing craft, this wasn't about some grand strategy map back in London. No way. This was about pure survival. They were literally being dropped into a kill zone, a wall of machine gun fire, artillery, mines, and barbed wire. The official U.S. Army history puts it so starkly, really capturing the brutal reality they faced from the second their ramp went down.
You've probably seen that iconic photograph, right? The one of troops wading ashore? Its actual title is Into the Jaws of Death, and you can absolutely see why. The courage and the sheer chaos of that morning are just palpable. But to really get why they were there, why they were facing those jaws of death in the first place, we've got to rewind a little and look at the immense pressure that led the Allies to try such a dangerous gamble.
So why was this incredibly risky invasion even necessary? Well, by 1944, Nazi Germany had basically turned the entire Atlantic coast of Europe into a massive defensive system. If the Allies wanted to liberate France and defeat Germany, they had no other choice. They had to break through that wall.
And no, the road to D-Day was paved with some intense political pressure. For years, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had been hammering his allies, demanding they open a second front to draw German armies away from the Eastern Front. So, at a series of high-stakes conferences, the Allied leaders finally committed. This wasn't just a military call, it was a political promise. And the scale of the operation just kept growing and growing, expanding from 3 divisions to 5, which meant they needed more landing craft, and that ultimately pushed the invasion from May into June.
In this is what they were up against. Fortress Europe wasn't just a propaganda slogan, it was real. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had been beefing up the defenses for months, ordering millions of mines, concrete bunkers, and these massive beach obstacles they called Rommel's asparagus, all designed to just shred landing craft and gliders.
So, here's the billion-dollar question. How do you attack the most heavily defended coastline in the world? Well, the answer is, you don't attack it where the enemy expects you to. You have to make them look the wrong way. I mean, really think about that. This was the central problem for the Allied planners. You have nearly 7,000 ships and over 150,000 men that have to cross the English Channel completely in secret. Pulling that off was going to require a level of misdirection and pure trickery that had never, ever been seen before in warfare.
The logic here was just a brilliant piece of strategic judo. The Germans were absolutely convinced the invasion had to come at Pas de Calais. I mean, it's the shortest distance, the most obvious choice. The Allies knew the Germans thought this, and they used that assumption against them, choosing the wider, less defended, and in the end, strategically better beaches of Normandy.
And here's how they sold that lie. Operation Fortitude was an absolute masterclass in deception. They created a whole phantom army under the command of the famous and feared General George Patton, complete with inflatable tanks and fake radio chatter. On the night of the invasion, planes dropped these metallic strips, called window, to create ghost fleets on German radar screens, all looking like they were heading for Calais. And get this, the deception was so good that Hitler kept 15 divisions just waiting there, doing nothing, even weeks after the real landings had started.
So, with the German high command totally fooled, the stage was set. Let's get back to the action and see how this incredibly complex assault was actually designed to unfold across a 50-mile stretch of coastline.
The attack was basically a 3-part symphony. First, in the dead of night, you had thousands of airborne troops dropping behind the lines to create chaos and grab key bridges and roads. Then, at dawn, the naval fleet just unleashed a massive, overwhelming bombardment. And finally, at 6:30 a.m., the infantry hit the beaches.
The sheer scale of it all is almost impossible to wrap your head around. We're talking about more than 156,000 soldiers, Americans, Brits, Canadians, and others, storming those beaches on that first day alone.
And supporting them, an armada of nearly 7,000 ships. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in history. Everything from gigantic battleships to tiny little landing craft, all converging on this one vital stretch of French coast. Now, the coastline was broken up into 5 sectors, which really meant 5 different battles were happening all at once, and the experience on each beach was dramatically different. For the Americans at Utah Beach, things went relatively smoothly, but just down the coast at Omaha, they were walking into a nightmare. The British and Canadians at Gold, Juno, and Sword faced tough resistance, but managed to push inland, with the Canadians at Juno actually advancing the furthest of any Allied force on D-Day.
But we have to focus on Omaha Beach for a second. Because of some major intelligence failures, the Americans there ran straight into an elite, full-strength German division that wasn't even supposed to be there. The pre-invasion bombing had completely missed its targets. For hours, the entire landing was on the verge of total collapse, with men just pinned down by devastating fire from the cliffs above.
So the first 24 hours were just a chaotic, brutal fight for survival. But as the sun started to set on June 6th, what had actually been achieved? Had this massive, insane gamble really paid off?
By the end of the day, the Allies had a foothold, and that was the crucial victory. But, and this is a big but, it was a fragile one. None of the 5 beaches were connected yet, and major objectives like the city of Caen were still in German hands. They had secured what the military calls a lodgment, basically a secure position, but the war was far from over. In fact, some of the hardest fighting was just about to begin.
And the cost of that foothold was just staggering. In a single day, the Allies suffered an estimated 10,000 casualties, with over 4,400 confirmed dead. The German defenders, too, paid an incredibly heavy price. These numbers really represent the immense human tragedy at the heart of this huge strategic success.
But here's why it all matters. D-Day worked. It was the decisive blow that finally cracked Fortress Europe. From this day forward, millions more Allied troops and tons of supplies would pour into France, opening the final chapter of the war on the Western Front.
And that really leaves us with his final thought. D-Day secured the beachhead, but the brutal Battle of Normandy would rage for another 2 months. The invasion guaranteed that the war would eventually be won. The question was no longer if the Allies would win, but at what unbelievable cost that final victory would be paid.